Hello, everyone. Today in Grad Talks, we can start, I guess, right? It is 1 minute later than that. Today we are hosting Dr. Matineh Eybpoosh'a. She's an entrepreneur. I would like to make a brief introduction. Hello, Matineh, you can hear us, right?
I can hear you. I hope you can hear me too. Hi.
Now you are in States, California, I guess.
Yes.
How many hours difference?
It is 6 a.m. here.
6
so,
early in the morning?
Yes.
So like 11 hours difference. Oh, thank you for an early morning seminar for us. Okay, I would like to make a brief introduction for your resume. Dr. Matineh Eybpoosh'a is an entrepreneur in the energy and clean technology space. Her first venture, WhatLearn, is an AI software company for optimal dispatch of grid batteries. She led the company towards a successful acquisition by an energy private equity firm, where Matineh and her team led the deployment of WhatLearn software to a fleet of utility-scale batteries. Currently, Dr. Eybpoosh'a is working on her second venture, where she is addressing some of the biggest challenges in integrating electrical vehicles to the electricity grid. She has an over 10 years of experience and leadership in the building solutions in the energy space. Before the company WhatLearn, she was the director of data science at Quencher, excuse my pronunciation if I'm wrong, an energy management startup. She completed her PhD and second master's at Carnegie Mellon University and her first master in the Middle East Technical University of Turkey. Okay, Matineh, we may start. We are listening your presentation. Tonight, we will be talking about batteries, electrical vehicles, and their role in the future of electricity grid. Okay.
Thank you, Murat Hocam, for the nice introduction, and thanks everybody for being here. Merhabalar. It is nice to be among the friends again. I always say Turkey is like my second home. I miss it a lot. Hopefully, I'm going to be back soon. Yes, I will be talking about what I have been focused on in the past decade or so, and I hope you find it interesting too. I would like to first talk about a little bit about the electricity grid. Maybe this is a little bit repetition, but it is worth to bring everybody on the same page about the basics of how the electricity grid looks like. We have across the globe established electricity grid about 1870s. So it is an old infrastructure. And there are differences from country to another country, or even within the country, different parts of the electricity can look different, but the basics and fundamentals are pretty much as you can see here. Everything starts with generations. We generate electricity through power plants, then we transmit the electricity through high voltage transmission lines, and then in substations, we reduce the voltage to a safe level and distribute them through distribution line to the end users and consumers. This in theory looks quite simple and has been working for hundreds of years now for us. However, things are changing, and if you look at how the electricity looks now, it is more like something like this. Now on the generation side, we have added renewable energy like wind farms and solar panels. We also are seeing more and more large scale, utility scale batteries or energy storages of some sort that we can add them throughout the electricity grid. Even on the consumer side, you can now see more complexities. You can have a battery in your house and store energy if you want, or have a backup power. you can add a solar panel on top of your roof and be a generator yourself. Even the cars these days started to consume electricity, electric vehicles, right? So things are getting a little bit more, the components are increasing. But another thing I would like to bring your attention to is not only the number of components we are adding to the electricity grid, but also the direction of these arrows, direction of flow of the electrons. We used to have just one direction flow of electrons. Now things are changing. We can actually bring back electricity from batteries to the electricity grid, or even through end users. The end users can even send back their excess generation to the electricity grid. So now we are dealing with this bi-directional flow of electrons, which can have its own challenges. If we were going to build this new electricity grid with all the new technologies from scratch, we would probably not come up with something like this, because this is not the most ideal way of doing things. However, we have this expensive, large infrastructure already in place for hundreds of years. There's no way that we can just scratch that and start from zero. So we had to add these technologies to the existing grid, and we had to adapt and adjust accordingly. And because of that, there are challenges that we see in the electricity grid. Of course, each of these components have their own operational features and restrictions and constraints, and cooperating all of them at the same time in the electricity grid, making sure the lights are always on, is very complex. We also have inadequate infrastructure, as I just talked about. The infrastructure is old. It is meant for this simple way of doing things, and it is just not ready in a lot of places for this increase in the technology advancement. Another thing I want to bring your attention to is the climate change impacts. Some areas more than others, for example, in California, we are seeing the impacts of climate change every day more and more on the electricity grid. For example, in California, we have this wildfire season that because of the wildfire that are increasing due to climate change, we have to, there's no other way to cope with it other than at this point to cut the power and cause blackouts for the consumers, which has its own challenges. And I know Turkey, unfortunately, recently had some wildfires as well. So these kind of climate-related issues are increasing, and our electricity grid is unfortunately not equipped to manage or adapt to these kind of impacts. So I wanted to just bring this attention to how the electricity grid look, how complicated it is, and there are challenges, so that I think it sets us better for what is coming. Now, we cannot talk about the electricity grid without talking about the market and the way electricity is being transacted as a financial commodity. And here I'm talking about deregulated market. Still, in some countries, the electricity grid is regulated. What that means is that the prices are set by some sort of government entity or some sort of institution, and there's no competition. But in a lot of countries, including US and a lot of Europe, the electricity market has become deregulated. What that means is that you can actually trade electricity as a commodity, and the prices are set through in the market through buyers and sellers. So similar to the stock market, the prices usually are set through the demand and supply and the market conditions. For example, if you look at the graph, the picture on the bottom, if, for example, the transmission line is constrained and cannot provide the required electricity for the end user customers, then because the demand is higher than the supply, you can imagine that the electricity prices on this end would be higher, right? Because we cannot provide the electricity that needed. So that is how the market settles its prices. Depending on the market condition, the prices varies. And there are a lot of volatilities because we as retail consumers may not be aware, but on a wholesale level, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of volatility. The prices goes up and down. The generation goes up and down. The demand goes up and down on matter of minutes and seconds. So it is quite a volatile market. Some of the examples of the market, there are plenty of different types of market structures to help the grid to operate in the way it should and to keep the lights on. I'm just going to mention three of them, which are most common. The energy market, which is basically where you can buy or sell electricity. For example, if you're a generator, you say, hey, tomorrow at 2 p.m., I want to sell, for example, 1 megawatt hour of energy at hour 2. And this is how much I am selling it for. And if you are a big factory and you want to buy electricity, you go to this market and you submit your bid and you say, tomorrow at 2 p.m., I'm willing to buy 1 megawatt hour of energy and I'm willing to pay this much for it. Everybody submits their bids and offers and the market settles for a clearing price that is fair. And those who sell the electricity get paid with that money. Those who buy electricity have to pay that money. But there are other markets like ancillary service market. What does that do? In order for the electricity grid to work in a stable manner, the electrons have to travel through the lines within certain parameters. For example, the frequency of the electrons should be within a certain limit. Otherwise, we would see issues like our lamps like going on and off, or even bigger issues like fires on transmission lines or safety issues. That's why it is very important to keep everything within the range, operational range. So there is this ancillary service market only to serve that purpose, to make sure the grid is stable. So if you participate in this market, you say, I am available, waiting for the signal from the grid to just turn on my generation a little bit more when it's required, or turn it off, or even as a consumer, you can be in this market and consume a little bit more or less, depending on the market conditions, to make sure that those parameters are within the specified range. And then there's capacity market, where you're just available in case the market needs you, the grid needs you. So you provide this much of a certain amount of capacity. You say, I'm going to sit here waiting in case the grid needs me. So if the grid needs you, send you a signal and you have to be available. They may not need you, but you get paid for the availability. Just for being there and waiting, you get paid. And the prices usually are $1 per megawatt hour or $1 per megawatt. This is how the prices work out. Okay. Now that we have our grid basics and our market basics set up, let's talk about these new components that we saw in that picture, one of them being renewable energy. Renewable energy has overwhelming amount of benefits. They have substantially smaller environmental impact. They still do. There are some environmental impact associated with them. At the end of the day, they are man-made equipments and resources. However, it is like substantially smaller than fossil fuels that have lifelong impacts. They are substantially better for slowing down the climate change impacts. If you look at this graph, the lifetime CO2 emission of renewables is orders of magnitudes smaller than fossil fuels. So it is definitely necessary for us to use renewables if we want to fight against climate change. And they are sustainable and renewable, that we don't run out of them. So even socio-economically and socio-politically for countries, it just makes sense to be reliant on a source that doesn't run out for your energy. But even if I list so many like benefits here, if it is not cheap enough, unfortunately, the market is not going to adopt it as fast as we want. because it's all about money at the end of the day. So, but the good news is that the prices of renewables have been dropping drastically to a level that they are now competitive with the cheapest forms of electricity. As you can see on the left side, wind and solar and even battery storage prices are dropping in the past decade. And on the right, you see a map of the globe, and the colors show the cheapest form of energy. And as you can see, the blue being wind and yellow being solar, in a lot of countries, the cheapest source of energy now is already renewable energy. And for your information, in Turkey as well, the cheapest form of energy happens to be wind, even cheaper than coal, which is usually a very cheap source of energy. So these are good news. That means, like, even from financial perspective, it just makes sense to use renewable energy. But when we talk about all these good things, there's always challenges associated with things. And it is important to think about those challenges if we want to be realistic. And I want to bring two challenges of renewable energy: the timing and the location of their generation. In terms of the timing, the wind and solar necessarily are not available when we want them to be. We may generate too much electricity through renewables when we don't need them, or we may generate too little when we really need them. An example would be a phenomenon in California. It's known as duck curve, that we have been seeing as we add more and more solar into our grid here. So as you know, California is very sunny, and so on the x-axis here, you see the hours of the day, and during the y-axis, you see something called net load, which is basically the deduction of total consumption minus generation. So the lower this is, that means the more generation you have. During the first peak of the day, as the sun is out, we are having a lot of solar generation, and the net load every year, as we are adding solar capacity to the grid, the net load is dropping lower and lower. But on the second peak of the day, when everybody goes home, they turn on their AC, they turn on the dishwasher, and the load picks up, is when actually the sun goes down. So the solar generation drops, and you can see that there is this peak in the later time of the day when the generation drops. So this is a result of the intermittency or the timing of the generation that is not necessarily ideal for the load profile of the consumption. And the reason it's called duck curve, it's just because it looks like a duck. It has nothing else to do with ducks. But yeah, this phenomenon is very well known. And so how we can address this intermittency of renewable energy? Well, through energy storage. If we can add energy storages beside renewable energy production. So when we have excess generation, like here, we store our excess generation into batteries or energy storage for that matter. In this talk, we are going to focus on batteries. And we can discharge and use that excess generation later when we have less of a generation. So nowadays, that is why it is quite norm to see that when we are talking about renewable energy projects, we talk about installing energy storage of some sort on the side, or at least considering it. So how about the location? Usually renewables are mostly available during in areas that are a little bit farther to the load centers. For example, wind blows faster and is stronger on top of the mountains, or like the rural areas are better for large solar farms when there's not much building clutters and shade. So what can we do when the source of generation is so far from the source of consumption? Well, there are two solutions. One is transmission lines. But transmission lines are super expensive. That is one thing. It is requires enormous investment. But also logistically, it's not as simple to build these lines because they have to pass through people's lands and houses and streets. So, and they are not safe to be very close to urban areas. Another solution can be to decentralize generation and consumption, something that you might have heard called microgrid. So what we do there, we basically cut our ties to the outside transmission lines. And for a smaller area, we have our own generation, renewable generation we added. For example, here you can see wind farms and solar. We have our energy storages to make sure that we have that backup possibilities to maintain the stability of that microgrid. And we have a control system, and all these works as a mini grid for itself. But now the generation is around the consumption, so we don't need those transmission investments. So these kind of microgrids are on the rise because of their benefits, because they're more manageable, they are safer, more reliable, because it's just a smaller scale. But of course, it is not a widespread solution yet. We talked a little bit about batteries. I want to address some of the benefits of them other than what we just mentioned. The batteries, one interesting thing about them compared to other components that you see in this grid picture is that they can both consume and supply electricity. So they are one resource, but they can do both. So by installing just one energy resource at the grid, we have the flexibility of providing grid with both services, because consumption at times can also serve the grid. Because as we said, if there is like excess generation, we want people to consume a little bit more. So battery can take care of both those functionalities, which is super valuable. And they can do that very fast, in a matter of seconds, compared to, for example, a big power plant that if we require them to ramp up their generation, it's going to take them minutes or sometimes like half an hour to ramp up, as opposed to second response to the signals from the grid. So this is extremely valuable for stability of the grid. Because of all these benefits, right now they provide more than, at least in US, more than 21 grid services through those different markets. And because of these benefits, globally, you can see through this graph that the installation of batteries are on the rise, and it's like really growing exponentially across the globe. So now that we are talking about batteries, I would like to do a little bit of a battery 101, just very small terminology to better understand the batteries. My apologies for those who are already familiar with this. So there are usually three parameters that we should know about a battery. When we are talking in a conversation about a battery, those are the three that will come up. One is the energy capacity, usually referred to with megawatt hours. Another one is power capacity, megawatt, and the duration. So basically, the energy capacity is the total amount of energy provided by this battery. The power capacity is the rate that we can provide that amount of energy. And the duration is the duration for which we can provide that capacity. So I like to look at it through an example of a sand clock. So if we have a sand clock, the total amount of sand inside that sand clock is the same. It's not going to change. We have a certain amount of sand in there that's not changing. But depending on the width of this channel here, we can get that sand from the top to bottom faster or slower. So the rate can change. So that rate is megawatt. If the battery with higher megawatt capacity, higher power capacity can provide you that energy, that total amount of energy that they have faster. And how long they can provide it, it depends on how much energy they have. And the formula is energy equals to power multiplied by its time. So if you're hearing that we have a 100 megawatt 2-hour battery, that means this battery can provide 100 megawatt of power for a duration of 2 hours. That means this is a 200 megawatt hour battery. I hope that is a little bit clear. Another important factor about batteries is state of the health or battery degradation. You probably are familiar with that through your phone. As you're using your phone through time, you can realize that the battery starts to become less efficient, works you run out of battery faster, so you can see the performance of battery dropping. That is the same phenomenon. The state of the health of the battery degrades. There are factors affecting that. Calendar age is one of them, like just by sitting in there, batteries just degrade because of the chemical reactions. The temperature, batteries tend to perform poorly when the temperature is extreme, mostly on a hot end, and especially when they cycle and create and they work, they actually create more heat. That's why usually batteries are associated with on-site HVAC system to cool them down. The number of cycles, how many cycles you put in the battery, charge and discharge, the depth of discharge, whether you charge your battery all the way to 100% or usually keep it at, I don't know, 80% or closer. And charge and discharge rate, how fast you're doing this, and voltage, current, a lot of factors. So you can see this in this graph that as we put more cycles in the battery on the x-axis, the capacity that we can provide drops. And it depends on different types of the battery, different conditions. So it is important to know the state of the health of the battery, because if you're participating in markets in the grid and you're saying you're providing 200 megawatt hour of energy, you should know that actually you can provide that, or what is the state of the health of your battery and what is the real capacity that your battery right now has, given its state of the health. So now I want to talk a little bit about how advanced data analytics like machine learning and optimization can help all of this that we talked about, especially the performance of the battery. This was basically my first company that I co-founded, that we used artificial intelligence and optimization to enhance the performance of market-facing batteries. Again, what that means is that the batteries that participate in electricity grid market in order to make money, those markets that we talked about, energy market, ancillary service market. So we want to make sure that we enhance their performance. And we realize that machine learning and optimization has a lot of potential to help batteries to perform better. So bear with me here. I'm going to introduce a little bit more complexity into what the market look like, at least in the US. So let's say this blue arrow shows 2 days. One is the day ahead of the operating day, like maybe operating day is tomorrow, we are talking about, and today is the day ahead of tomorrow. We call it day ahead market. And there's an operating day, real-time market. So every day, before about 9 to 10 a.m., when the market closes, you have to make a decision about the operating day, what you're going to do in that operating day for every time interval in that operating day, usually hours. So you have to decide what services you want to provide with that battery. For example, if you look at the markets that we talked about, whether you want to do energy market, participate in the energy market for that hour into like operating day, or you want to do ancillary services. Well, if you want to do energy market, do you want to buy or sell? As we talked about, batteries can do both because they can both discharge and charge. Again, if you want to do either of those, do you want to submit your bids and offers now in the day ahead market, or do you want to wait for the real-time market when the operating day arrives and make a decision in that market, because there is also a different settlement happening in that operating day? If you want to do ancillary service, do you want to do regulation up, which means basically selling to the market, or regulation down, or do you want to do other sorts of ancillary services? So as you can see, it already is like a super complicated decision you have to make for just 1 hour. And considering the fact that that decision for that hour affects whatever you're going to do for the next hours. Because if you charge your battery during that hour, it affects your decisions for the next hours and the next hours. And usually that decision is made for like at least 1 day or 2 days in advance. And then you have to make a decision how much, like if you're buying or selling in either of these markets, how much you're going to do it for this particular hour and for the next hour and for the hour after that. And what is your offer or bid? Like how much money are you going to do that? So I hope it is obvious that it's a complicated decision, and that's why optimization and advanced analytics can help making that optimal decision for the time for the battery in the future. And the objective that optimization would try to maximize or minimize include maximizing the revenue, because at the end of the day, you are in that market to make money. Minimizing degradation, because we don't want to degrade the battery so bad that we have to replace it. We are talking about multi-million-dollar assets. We don't want to replace it sooner than we need to. Maybe you are also environmentally cautious. You want to minimize your carbon footprint, so you want to operate the battery in a way that is more environmentally cautious and has less emission. And maybe you want to minimize non-compliance risk. What that means is that you want to make sure that you have enough cushion, that if the grid sends a signal to you, you definitely can comply because the penalties are bad. So you can co-optimize all of these objectives, of course, but you have to have in mind, usually these objectives are competing each other. So if you make more money, that means you are degrading the battery more. So there is this balance that needs to be made and formulated. So because of all these complexities, when we started WattLearn, and even now, most of batteries are still being operated through very simple methods. We call them schedule-based participation. That means they look at the past, they say, okay, for the battery, it makes more sense during these hours just to do this. And let's not change it. Let's not try to optimize it. And you can imagine how suboptimal that can be. Okay, we talked about batteries, we talked about renewable energy, we talked about the grid. Now I want to talk a little bit about electric vehicles, EVs, and kind of link all of this together, how they come together at the end. Why do we need EVs? Because the EVs are the future of transportation. In a decade, in less than a decade, by 2030, we are going to see a huge portion of our cars to be electric. And just before this talk, I just overheard that it seems like Turkey is also having targets for electrification of transportation, which is amazing. And why we are doing all of this? Because the future of humanity depends on this transformation, because transportation is the highest emitting technology that we have right now, and we really need to address it right now, otherwise it's going to be too late. So of course EVs are very good, but again, every time I talk about something good, I talk about the challenges that they bring. Specifically, I want to talk about the electricity grid. They add a lot of load to the grid. Imagine if we all we all have EVs and we decide to charge them at the same time. That is a huge load added to the electricity grid that the electricity grid is not prepared for it yet. For example, according to one study, EVs would require around 500 to close to 900 terawatt hours of electricity globally by the end of decade. And just for the reference, last year, this amount was 80 terawatt hours. So it's like orders of magnitudes higher. And if you look at this picture of what portion of the load falls into what category of EVs, you can see the majority of that loads falls under the passenger vehicles, which are usually less controllable as opposed to, for example, a school bus that we know their roads, their routes, we know when to charge them, when to not charge them. We have more control over those kind of fleet as opposed to passenger vehicles that people can make any decision at any time they want. So preparing for that amount of load costs, according to some studies, $1,700 to $5,800 per EV for utilities. For example, if you have 20 million EVs by mid-decade, in US at least, that translates to $100 billion investment per utility. That is a huge amount of investment that this electricity grid has to undertake. And another challenge is that they are just different types of load. Our grid is not used to it. They are mobile, they're less predictable, they're scattered, decentralized. So that adds its own challenges. I'm almost done. This is one of the last slides. There are ways to make EVs part of the solution, part of this challenge. So if we, of course, just do simple charging and add the EVs whenever we want, no matter what time of the day is and what are the grid constraints, as you can see it in this graph, we just keep charging whenever we want. Of course, that is not the best solution, but we can do more. We can something called a smart charging that is doable right now as we speak. There are control, usually third-party companies in between that help you to receive signals from the electricity grid. And when the grid is at constraint, you can stop charging and postpone your charging to a better time so that you can help stabilize the grid so that you are part of the solution. Well, grid EVs potential doesn't end there. As we talked about, EVs have batteries, and the batteries can do bidirectional charging and discharging, something called vehicle to grid. So EVs actually not only can they charge, but they can also discharge back to the grid and be part of the solution to release the constraints in the grid. So in this graph, rather than stopping charge during this green time zone that the grid is at constraint, you can even discharge and give back electricity to the grid and be helpful in that way even further. Of course, there are still challenges for this V2G because it's a very nuanced technology. As we talked about how complicated the grid is, integrating this like bidirectionality of these mobile EVs into the grid is complicated. Infrastructure is still not there in terms of charging infrastructure and other stuff. I think the most important challenge to me that I see here in this list is regulations and laws, because the science and the technology moves way faster than the lawmakers and to making these things happen, and hopefully they move faster too. Business models required to be there to make these things commercially viable, these kind of ideas. The cost of hardware is still high for bidirectional charging. It has to drop. And user participation. A lot of people are not educated about the availability and possibilities that they can participate and be part of the solution. So electricity grids are going to be everywhere. They're going to make up to be the largest, as if we aggregate them, they're going to be the largest battery ever in existence. And the company that right now I'm working on, GigElev, is hoping that we can address some of these challenges, take these values and integrate it with the grid and be part of make EVs part of the solution for these problems. Finally, the closing remarks. I would like to end the talk with a few points here. One, that the climate change is real and it's happening now, and we're running out of the time. And renewables, energy storage, batteries, and EVs are definitely indispensable for the fight against climate change. As we talked about the challenges, they are not the small challenges, but they are also not impossible to address. We can do that with multidisciplinary effort. And you are at the school, you have the resources, you have the passion, you have the intelligence, so you can be part of the solution. And here I list a couple of things that we can do to address some of those challenges using data analytics. And as I mentioned, automation and computing can help scaling these technologies, engineering and science to improve some of the aspects like the cost, and inventing new business models. It's really important. No matter what the technology is, we need them to be able to commercialize. And last but definitely not least, educate yourself, educate everybody about the problems. And every decision you make, for example, the next car you buy, think about these things and think how you can be part of the solution to all of these problems. I hope I didn't bore everybody. I tried to be as fast as possible, and I hope you find it interesting. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Matineh. Thank you for this informative seminar. Do we have questions and comments? Now we can. Ozan Hocam, Melih, you can help me maybe. Unmute Ozan.
Yes, thank you very much, Matineh. That's a very good presentation. Actually, I'm also in the field and I'm also in the topic. I'm the IEEE PES Turkey chapter chair, so we have many connections with the DSOs and also with the TSO, and we also have some existing works, also plan some new works regarding the integration of electrified mobility to power system with different business models and also technical issues. So I want to know, how do you see the role of electric vehicles, a group of personal electric vehicles or a fleet of electric vehicles to improve the resilience of power system operation, especially in the high impact, low probability events?
That's a very good question. High impact, low probability events are one of the trickiest ones because just to clarify that a little bit further, there are times that almost nobody can predict, for example, that an electricity power plant would trip offline all of a sudden unexpectedly, and the grid all of a sudden becomes constrained, and the prices go high. So any help there can go a long way to the grid. And and also there it usually has like high reward. The prices usually spikes a lot. And if you can provide any services during those times, that is going to be actually a lot of monetary benefit to it. So that being said, definitely, I see the potential. I see that the electricity grid and fleet, especially the fleet, aggregated in an aggregated way, can solve those kind of problems. The question becomes a business model and how to make that happen. Because yes, electricity grid can benefit from this bidirectionality, and yes, EVs have batteries on board with them, but those batteries are usually on a smaller side compared to the size that the grid can actually benefit from. So they need to be aggregated, and in order to aggregate them, we need to bring a bunch of drivers, bunch of people all together. And also another challenge is that where to put all of these cars. There should be an interconnection between those cars and the grid where those kind of events happen. So you already can see from this answer that there are challenges like business model, how to motivate and incentivize those, like everybody that is involved to do that. Infrastructure challenges like where are those interconnections, and how we are gonna, for example, if we're bringing, let's say, optimistically 20 buses or trucks, EV trucks to a location, where are those locations? How much infrastructure is available? Should we have this infrastructure everywhere, or should we? Every grid has to have like dedicated areas depending on how they see the grid performing. And okay, what are the hottest spots? Let's at least invest in those areas and make some infrastructure available in those areas. So I don't have like an answer for you. The only thing I can tell is that EVs can. We all can see that they are able. They are technologies that can do that. They are batteries that have wheels and can move where we want them. We just need to find the infrastructure and the business model to make it happen. And I'm working through some of those questions myself throughout this new company that I'm working on.
Thank you very much, Martin. The reason I asked this was in the last year we had a flood. Maybe you may heard of it. I think that flood, the DSO responsible for this region already used mobile generators to at least partially electrify some points with crucial loads, because the diesel generators already run out of fuel at some point, so that at some point they need to be energized. So they use the mobile generators, and already we were proposing them to invest some onto mobile energy storage system, and also the possibility of using their fleets of electrified vehicles, because this DSO already had a fleet of electric vehicles to use in the normal operations, so that we already proposed it for their emergency case conditions, at least to electrify some parts, at least for a pilot level. This is why I asked you about it.
That is actually, yeah, that is very interesting use case. In fact, like I'm also like looking into those kind of like outages, unplanned outages, blackouts, climate related blackouts. And I think EVs definitely have a lot to offer there. Bringing EVs from the places that are not affected, the electricity is available, to the places that are affected, at least like serving places like hospitals, or providing some sort of like partial like electricity to the affected areas and citizens, I think definitely is a value.
Thank you very much for your nice answer. And thank you very much also again for your presentation.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Ozan Hocam. Serap Hocam, Serap Güneş, do we have a question?
Yes. I would like to ask a question. Thank you very much for this very nice talk. I really enjoyed it. Actually, you mentioned many points at your talk about this renewable energy. As a person working in the field of this renewable energy, I'm trying to build up solar cells. In my lessons also, I emphasize that generation, transport, and storage are the most important parts of this story. And especially the time difference, the gap between the energy generation and the time consumed is the main problem. So I would like to ask, are these storage and generation technologies like the solar cells and batteries, are they communicating with each other? People working in the field of storage, for example, when developing their products, do they consider the needs of energy generation technologies? Do they catch up each other, or are the developments in parallel? Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's also a great question. They do, for the most part. So I actually, throughout the previous company, I had a chance to work with some of these developers that actually building these projects, renewable projects and battery projects. And I have to say, like, when they are building these projects, these are huge multi-million-dollar like commitments that they're doing. Nowadays, at least I can talk from my experience that they do consider coexisting energy storage with renewable projects as they are thinking about developing them. They may not always end up making sense from business and financial point of view, because, for example, you are building a solar farm, but there's already storages close nearby, so you can rely on those, or you can make agreements with those rather than developing your own. But they definitely, based on my experience, they are going hand in hand. Nowadays, it's very difficult to find a project that just doesn't consider, like, for example, building a solar farm without considering what are the energy storage options and being blind to it. At least I'm glad that we have, the industry has improved that much. And again, this is my experience from the US market. I'm not sure about other areas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Serap Hocam. Next question is from Nazmiye Kopacak. Can we unmute Nazmiye? Melih? Or I can read the question. From Nazmiye Kopacak, what is your opinion about the different incentives over the world related to today's electrification of transportation? EU and US have some roadmaps, as well as China or Japan. Do you believe that this could be a challenge for the future projections?
That is interesting. Incentives definitely, I mean, the reason they are there is because they are needed, because the governments realize without the incentives, they cannot reach the goals. I think at early stages, incentives can be like really game changing, especially when the technology is not, in terms of the price, is not where it needs to be. For example, electric vehicles, even though the overall life of owning an electric vehicle may actually be lower or compatible with ICE vehicles, but it still is, the upfront cost is still high for a lot of consumers. So unless you provide those kind of incentives, you cannot convince a lot of people to like convert into electric vehicles, at least at this point. But as we have seen with a lot of renewable energy incentives across time, when as the technology evolves and the prices drop, we have seen that the incentives also fade away. I think at the beginning of any transformation, big transformation like this, it is very important and crucial for governments to be to allocate resources to help the initial kickoff of this kind of technologies. So yeah, I do think they are important for the projections and achieving them. And just adding a little bit of experience about the solar, I remember that they were very good. There still is some incentives, but at the beginning they were like wind and solar incentives in US, and that with firsthand I saw how much impact they had in people making decisions, developer making decisions to build these projects, because of the tax benefits that they had, because of the all the incentives that they had. So I think it's a game changer.
Thank you. The next question is from Umut Eren Doğru. I'm not sure if do you want to ask yourself, Umut, or I can read the question. The question is, today we as humanity trying to make electrical vehicles common on the streets, but we are trying to use the renewable energy sources. We still produce our electric with fossil fuels. Shouldn't we also be faster about using renewable energy? That's the question.
Yeah, we should be faster.
Yeah.
But I guess I get your point about maybe another way of putting this is right now a lot of electricity in a lot of countries is coming from fossil fuels. So electrifying transportation ahead of transitioning from the renewable to from fossil fuels to renewable may not sound like a reasonable thing to do. But my counter argument there would be electrification of transportation takes so much time, first of all, that we should start. We are not gonna, they're not dirtier when we are thinking about the life cycle, they're not dirtier than ICE cars, even with fossil fuel generation. And another thing is that during their life, like after they're produced, during their lifetime, even if they are using fossil fuels, the pollution that they create and their their impact on the environment, the carbon footprint is very, very lower than ICE cars. So even if the generation is mostly coming from the electricity generation, mostly coming from fossil fuels, studies show that there is still cleaner source of transportation compared to ICE cars. But definitely, I think that is a good point, that we need to address that side of the equation, that if the electricity coming is green, we are not getting the full potential of, if the electricity that's coming is not clean, we are not getting the full potential of EVs.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The next question is from Emirhan. The question is, especially in Turkey, we consume a lot of unrenewable energy sources to produce electricity. Is this a good idea to use hybrid cars instead of EV until we exchange percentage of using renewable energy sources to produce electricity?
It's always good idea to not use ICE cars, like gas cars. So if I don't have like a specific data to back this up. So this is going to be actually my intuitive answer. That I think if you are, it's a personal kind of decision. If you are like, you're not sure about like EVs or hybrid, go with hybrid, that's fine. But don't go with ICE. So your next car, at least try to move that way. But have that in mind, the hybrid cars still use gas. And going back to my previous answer, even if the source of the electricity doesn't come from renewable energy, it's still cleaner to use an EV. It is still better for the environment to use an EV versus an ICE car. So I guess that somehow answers your question as well, that if you are undecided and money is not a problem, I would go with EV, but there are of course other things to consider. One of the things to consider when you're thinking about EV versus hybrid is the infrastructure. A lot of countries don't have the charging infrastructure as we wanted, and if you are a type of a driver that have to travel long distances from cities to cities, maybe, and there's not much charging infrastructure along the way. So maybe hybrid at this point is a better idea until you wait for the infrastructure to develop. So it's not only about like, when it is about the source, I still think that EVs are cleaner, but there are other factors to consider. In California, we have a lot of charging infrastructure, but even in US, we don't have that much in Midwest, for example.
Another question, but thank from Professor Sharaf Engin. He is also from the field. He says, thank you very much for all the comments and on the renewable energy and its market, in particular energy storage technologies. Thank you, Sharaf Hocam. And another question from Nader Javani, Dr. Javani. Maybe you want to ask for yourself, Hocam, please.
Thank you for the nice presentation. Actually, my question is about, you partially covered it. If you consider the EV for a province such as Alberta in Canada, it is not that much clean compared to what we have in, let's say, Montreal, which is based on the hydro. So my question is in this way: if we consider we have, let's say, green energy. So from the very beginning, one option is to just change this to the hydrogen, for example, through the electrolyzer. Or the second is to distribute through the grid. And then we can use the batteries as the electrified transportation. So if we consider the two types of the electrified transportation, the first is fuel cell, second is batteries, which one do you think it has the better future? Let's say for a city like Istanbul, that we don't have that much maybe resilient network to support that much, individual and scattered consumers in this part, and ignoring all the incentives. Based on your observation and your experience, which one do you think can have a better future for electrified transportation?
So just to understand your question, so the options were to use batteries versus
fuel cells. So at the very beginning, we don't send to the grid, just we send it to the electrolyzers, we join hydrogen, and then we can just get rid of all these problems related to the network, because we have stored hydrogen and we are using it on board as the fuel cell electric vehicles. So this is the option, that there's this competition between the fuel cell electric vehicles and the battery ones. So these two are very, they are in a very tough competition with each other. So which one do you think has a good future?
So I don't want to be unfair to the fuel cell hydrogen cars, because I don't have that much information, like that much experience with them. I've been focused on batteries in the past, God knows how many years, but from what I can see in the market here is that they don't stand much of a chance compared to EVs, battery EVs, at least in the Western market in US. I actually, now that you asked this question, I'm curious to go and search why. But even though the batteries are expensive, there is still like EVs with batteries seem to be finding a better market success compared to the other ones.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions or comments? One more question, maybe the last one. From Salih, do you want to ask for yourself, or are there new kind of battery technologies on the way that can revolutionize EVs in terms of efficiency and range? If so, could it be said that it is not the best time now to buy EV? If there's a transition, so maybe it's not the best time.
There are, the answer to the first question is that there are always, even very recently, Tesla just had an upgrade on their batteries for the new brand of EVs. So there are, every day there are coming new technologies. The battery industry on a hardware side and chemistry side is like improving by second. So yes, there are better batteries and coming every day. The answer to your second question, no, you don't need to wait because if you are, there's always going to be better. That is my opinion, of course. There are always better technologies are coming, but if you want to always wait for the best one to come, it's not like our technology right now is at the stage that is like flaky and it's not working and we're not sure. It is working. It is working very well. We have traveled long distances. Again, infrastructure is a different problem, charging infrastructure, but the battery, the car itself is capable of doing everything we need. And the batteries are just doing fine. So you don't need to wait. And if the technology grows and better things come in, maybe in future you change to a better one. But I don't think we are at the stage of growth that we need to wait and see what's happening, because the technology is already mature enough to address our needs as consumers.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Resul maybe changed his mind. Resul, do you have the question?
Yes, I would say thank you so much for this interesting topic about the electricity. And my question is, can we consider like solid waste power as one of the, I would say, renewable energy? And thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I think, but there are of course like different challenges and concerns about it. I'm not again like a full super expert in that, so I don't want to comment something that end up being inaccurate. But I think they are better than a lot of fossil fuel sources. Yeah.
Thank you. I guess we are done with the questions. Yes, no more comments. I would like to thank again to Dr. Matineh Eybpoosh for this nice presentation. And also I would like to especially thank for sacrificing your sleep, because it's early in the morning in California,
No
6 a.m. I guess. So it's like 7 now. Thank you again.
No worries.
And
It was nice to be around you all.
Yes, thank you. And I would like to see you all for the next week's Grad Talks. Thank you for everyone. And good morning to California again. Thank you, Dr. Matineh.
Thank you. See you guys again.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.